About 2 years ago, I was in India, and I had reached Calcutta. First of all, I think I'll tell you how I got over the difficulty at landing. I don't know whether you know it, but the South African and Indian governments certainly don't love each other. I could go into that and tell you why, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't belong to our kind of way of living. So, although this Swami had written inviting me to India and was taking full responsibility for my being there, I had forgotten to take this letter with me when I landed in Madras. And because I had no letter to prove that I, as a South African, had come there because the government had permitted me to, I was arrested. 2 nice tall policemen with red hats, white suits, and I don't know if it was a gun or what they had, but you know, they were good, real policemen, came to arrest me. And I could feel that nice feeling they had. You know, when the British left, India was in turmoil and still is really, and well, they hadn't had that nice feeling of dominating a European perhaps for a little while, and they loved marching me to the police station. And I'm quite sure that they would have enjoyed it more if I had been afraid. But I was not afraid. If you are doing nothing wrong, you are not afraid. When I got to the police station, I didn't understand all they were jabbering about, although Indians can speak English, quite a lot of them. And at last, after 10 hours of standing there in that heat and all this jabbering going on, and my passport thrown across the room, and several of them spitting down at my feet, I said, you know, can anybody here listen to me for a minute? Can you speak English? Yes, one of the policemen would speak English to me. I said, you are not spitting at my feet. You are spitting at the feet of those who have hurt you at some time or another. I accept that for them. Now, one of them said, what is your religion? I said, what is yours? If you are a Mohammedan, then God to you is Allah. If you are a Hindu, he is Brahm. If you are well, you know all the names, I can't go through them. There's Ram and Brahm. If you are a Jew, it's Jehovah. If you are a Christian, it's God. But I said there is only one deity, and that deity is your Father and my Father, and that makes you my brothers, and I am your sister. But I am aware of that, and therefore I would not hurt you. You are not aware of it, so you try to hurt me. To my amazement, he jabbered to the Indians, and all of them went, Salam, Mimsab, Salam. Do you see what I had done? I had recognized the one self in all peoples everywhere. And I found that even on the border of Tibet, when they were all chattering around me, wondering who I was, why I'd come, if I went, they couldn't understand the words, but if I went like this and in my heart said, I salute the one self within all men, they dropped away. And every difficulty I had was solved by that. Now there was no fear whatsoever. I was with God and God was with me. Now this is a thing that you will enjoy perhaps even more than that. I arrived in Calcutta and I had very little money left. I had enough to buy my ticket to Kalimpong, one of the hill stations, but no money to go further, and I was going much further. I was going to be journeying for on and off 3 or 4 weeks after that. What would you have done if you had just enough money to buy that ticket to Kalimpong and you were going a long way and you had all the way to come back? What would you have done? I will tell you, if you could be a little child with your hand in your father's, you would do what I did. I bought my ticket to Kalimpong. And 2 days before I was to leave, the young lady who was with me said to me, Mrs. Dekoch, have you got enough money for this trip? I said, I've always got enough money for everything. Have you? And she said, well, I was just wondering because I won't be able to lend you any. I said, I never borrow. I might lend some to you before we finish, but I never borrow. She said to me about 4 o'clock, I think it was that afternoon, Mrs. Dekoch, I've done a terrible thing. I've looked in your handbag. And I find that apart from your ticket to Kalimpong, you have a few rupees left, which amounted to very little, £1.10. What would that be in dollars? I don't know. You can work that out. Not much. And she said, you cannot go on that journey. I said, oh, yes, I can. And every headache you get, and every trouble you feel inside you about me now, you've deserved for opening my bag. But I have no fear, and if you have, well, that's too bad. By the way, I said, come with me. I'm going to spend those few rupees. Oh, she said, you can't. I said, oh, yes, I can. It won't take me any further, so I may as well spend it. And I saw some very nice Hindu slippers I'll buy for my daughter with that money. And we went along, and I spent the rest, so there was nothing. We went for the mail to Cook's, and she said to me, well, you've got a big batch. Are you going to bother to read them? I said, no, you read yours. I'll stroll around the office. Now watch God in action. No fear. I had used what I had to go forward the little way that I could go. Now watch God in action. I saw over one of the counters in Cook's office overseas inquiries for overseas drafts, and I smiled because I thought, well, who gets them? There aren't any people here now. I know very few Europeans. I wonder who gets them. So I strolled over to this man and I said, that's rather funny. There aren't many people to get overseas drafts now. He said, no, Mem Sahib, there are not. What are you doing here in India? So I told him why I had come, that I was visiting the temples of these holy men. Why, he said, that's something we would all like to do. However, he said, would you like us to keep your mail while you're gone? Now watch the guidance of God. Why did I go to that counter? Why did I speak to him? He said, oh, I'll take your name and address down. You needn't bother to go over to the mail counter. I'll take it down. So I gave him my name and my address, and he said, Johannesburg, South Africa. Why, there's been a sum of money lying here for you for 3 or 4 weeks. I said, here in India? Yes, he said, nobody knew who you were. And he said, it came anonymously. Well, I said, how much is that? £100. Now, this is the best part of the story. I am never surprised at God opening my path, but this was the end of the story. It suddenly dawned on me that that might have been sent to me by somebody, and I rather thought it was somebody whom I would not like to have accepted money from. If I go too long into that story, it'll take too long. So I decided that I wouldn't spend it till God showed me who sent it. I wouldn't touch it till God showed me who sent it. I had 1 day to go. And the money had been lying there for 3 weeks. How could I know? Of course, this woman who was with me laughed and said, what are you going to do, sit up all night praying? No, I said, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to use it till God shows me where it came from. Well, she said, I don't see how that can happen. Why, it's been lying here for 3 weeks and it's anonymous. How can you know? I said, I know that God will not fail me. I shall know. Well, we were to catch the train to Kalimpong in the afternoon. And in the morning I went down to see if there was any mail. And there were 2 letters. One was to tell us that cholera had broken out very badly in Calcutta and we were to be treated for cholera. We were to have a cholera injection. Also that the ship would be leaving 10 days sooner and that we must try to be back from the mountains in time. They couldn't contact us there. This was the other letter. Dear Mrs. Dekoch, I regret to have to reveal my identity concerning £100 which I sent to India. But I have since heard of the state in India, and the muddle and confusion, and I feel you will never get this money. I sent it to Madras. Madras is 2 days, good 2 days journey from Calcutta. And I beg of you to apply for this money in case you never get it. When you return, will you please never mention it if you should see me? As this was a direct voice from God telling me you were in need. The signature was that of a man whom I hadn't seen for 3 years, but I was with his wife when she was passing. And it was a very glorious experience, 3 years before. So I knew that I could spend the £100. But the end of the story is this, that when I got back to Johannesburg, I met the person whom I thought had sent it, and from whom I would not have accepted it. And he said, I happen to know that somebody sent you £100 to India. I said, oh, did somebody tell you then? No, he said, I went into Cook's to do the same myself. And they said, oh, why, somebody has sent her some already to Madras. Oh, he said, she'll never get it. I'll pay for a cable. You send that straight away to Madras and have that forwarded to Calcutta. Do you see the hand of God in all things? So I had plenty to lend my friend who badly needed it before she got home. Well, those are very material things. But I have those happen to me all the time. I start on a journey, or somebody writes to me and says, will you come to East London and Port Elizabeth and give us 5 or 6 weeks of meetings? This happened about just over a year ago. And would you tell us what sized halls you would like? Because we are very willing to do all that side of the business for you, and you can settle it all when you come. So I had to wonder how I should go, and then I thought, I must go, because it looks so impossible. So I must do it. So I decided it would be very nice if I went from East London and Port Elizabeth and came back by ship to Durban and went back that way to Johannesburg. That was my idea. So I handed the idea over to God. Do you do that? Just drop it in the universal bowl and say, well, Father, that's my idea. What's yours? Take out of it what is good and use it, and discard what is foolish. I build a frame, but you fill it. And even if my frame is wrong, knock it down. That is how I approach God. And it didn't happen the way I wanted it. I thought that if God would permit that, why, he would supply the means for me to do the round trip. 2 days before I was due to go, there was no money to take the railway journey, which was a very costly one. And I said, well, then it's obvious you don't want me to do that round trip. You're keeping me right up to the 11th hour because you want to do it your way. All right, well, whichever way it is, so be it. In the meantime, I had written to tell them I did not know whether I'd be coming by train, ship, car, or plane. So there wasn't any point in telling them just how or when I would arrive, but I was coming. 2 days before, as I say, the time came, I had no possible means of going, let alone any possible means of getting halls. And the lady rang up and asked if she could have an appointment with me. And she was in distress because she was pensioned from a bank in East London and had come up to live with her sister in Johannesburg, who plainly showed she didn't want her with her anymore. And she said, I have heard that you are going to East London on a lecture tour. Now, Mrs. Dekoch, I dare not go all that way alone by car, and I just cannot get a passenger. Would you mind cancelling your railroad ticket and come with me? Do you see you're under no obligation whatsoever? So I said yes, and I'll pay all the expenses on the road. I hadn't anything. Just about enough to settle up the few little things there. Why, she said, that's very kind of you. I certainly, you take me all the way and I'll pay all the expenses. Meaning the hotels on the way and so on, meals. So when she left, I said, "You heard that, didn't you, Father? Because you see, I must do my part." Oh, there are a lot of people who think it's sitting down and letting everything fall into your lap. Oh, no. You must do your part. We must not be under any obligation. We must render service for service. Well, the evening before we were going, she was picking me up at 5 o'clock on the Friday morning so that we could get away early. And the evening before, I went down to the caretaker and I said, "If you should see a young lady coming out of my flat," you say apartment, it means the same thing, "don't mind, she's just a girl who looks after my correspondence." "Oh," she said, "that's all right." And we got talking, and I went upstairs, and we live in this way. The native boys, our natives that work on these buildings, put anything that's delivered into your flat. They have a master key, and so they put anything in. If books are returned or anything like that, they just go in and put it in for you. So I got back, and in the hall on the table I saw a book which had been returned, as that might be, covered in brown paper. If that book had not been covered in brown paper, I should not have opened it to see what book it was. I would have simply picked it up and put it on my bookshelf. But it was covered in brown paper, and I thought, well, now, whoever borrowed that book has been very nice covering it and keeping it clean. I wonder who had that and what the book is. And there was an envelope. And in the envelope was £50. Why, I don't even know who had the book. And this was what was written. "We have just heard that you're going on a lecture tour. Through you, God has blessed our whole family. Through you, may our thanksgiving be given." I paid the expenses all the way. Then I got to East London, and we had a very, very lovely time. The meetings were packed out. I spoke to the Theosophists, the Spiritualists, the churches, everything. Everybody decided that I was all right for everything. Didn't think that's nice and comfortable. They don't shut you out. Once they know you love God, really and truly, nobody shuts you out. And so at the end of the time, I was wondering what all these halls were going to cost. We'd had the council chamber of the City Hall, we'd had the Seamers Institute, we had the supper room of the Coliseum Theatre for interviews, and this was for a long period. When I said at the end of the time, "Well, Miss Mackey, I must have all my bills now," she said, "It's a funny story, Mrs. Dekoch. I don't know if you'll understand it, but it's a funny story. After your first meeting, there was an Irish padre there, and he said, 'Who's taking the collections?' So she said, of course we said, 'Oh, she never takes collections.' 'Well, isn't there a basket at the door?' 'No, she never has a basket at the door. Love's message is free, and she gives it out free to the world. She says she didn't buy it, so how can she sell it?' Well, she said, this padre just couldn't understand this, and she said, when I went to see about the halls, they told me that at least 20 people went to pay for all the halls. Nobody left their name. I don't know to this day who paid for all the halls. Friends, why I tell you these little stories is not because I want you to know the things that happen in my life. It is because I want you to see that if you go the whole way, surrender utterly. Don't do a thing about it when you can't see your way. Don't rub your head and say, what shall I do? I'd better wire them. Oh, maybe in this case I'll have to borrow a little. Or, oh, perhaps I'd better sell a few things, and you get a headache. And when you get a headache over worrying, God cannot work in you. I wouldn't mind getting a headache over working for him, but I wouldn't like a headache over worrying. And you see, this is the secret. Let you go the whole way, right up to the last moment. He leads you right up the garden path sometimes. Sometimes you hear him almost click the gate. But he is never late. and he never lets you down. And I only tell you those few stories of mine, and there are hundreds and hundreds. How I got to America last time, how I got here this time. Would you like to hear that? Well, you know, this is a very unusual afternoon for me, but I do think you've had things a bit heavy today. I feel like things are perhaps be quite good. Well, I had a letter from my father, who lives in England, to tell me that my mother was dying. Before I'd hardly got used to that idea, I had a letter to say my sister had died. Then came the cable that my mother had died. My father is 88. But before I got the news to say that my mother had really gone, I got a terrific hunch to write and say, I will be home for your birthday in April. Hadn't the slightest idea how I could. But I knew that if God had said that, he meant it. Now, you might want to say here, how do you know that God says it? As I told them this afternoon. When it's something that looks as if you cannot possibly do it, and you hear something say you can, then you know that's God. Because you would raise every argument against it, but God says, go ahead, do it. Well, I went to all the shipping offices, only to be laughed at. Ships were full. People had booked a year before, months before. There was nothing, and that there were 800 people waiting for passengers on the Union Castle ships. So I come straight out of there because that is third dimensional talk. Fourth dimensional talk is that God has a place for all his children. And when I say all his children, I don't mean everybody in the world. I mean those that are led by the Spirit. They become the sons and heirs of their Father. So I went straight to the passport office and got my passport fixed up. In fact, I got everything fixed up. I got all the luggage ready, I arranged for the classes, I left someone to stay in my flat, and I didn't go near a shipping office again, because they had said the final word, but God had the final word. Just 10 days, all the classes were saying, have you got a ship? I said, my dears, there's 10 more days to go. But you know, you've got to get all the way to Cape Town. I said, God knows that. God knows all about that. But do you really believe you'll go? I said, no, I don't. I know I'm going. And I'm not going to do another thing about it. Well, the 10th day before I actually left, there was a phone call, and this was what I got. Mrs. Dekoch, I am so happy to tell you that you're fixed up on the Edinburgh Castle to sail March the 28th for England. See, I was there for my father's birthday in April. So I said, who are you? Oh, he said, that's rather a wonderful story. I was at a party a few nights ago, he said, and it was a party I wasn't very interested in, and there was a young lady there who also wasn't interested in the party. And we kind of got talking. And we talked of spiritual things. And I said to her, for such a young girl, you have a very, very wide understanding. And she said, oh, yes. I go to classes that a Mrs. Dekoch has, and I found a way to think. Why, he said, isn't that the woman with the uncanny faith? That is my nickname there. And she said, well, you'd think so if I told you that she's all ready to go to England without a ship. So he said, well, I laughed and I said, that's hardly possible, you know, to get to England without a ship. And she said, not for her. So I said, but who are you? He said, well, you see, she didn't know who she was talking to. Well, I said, who are you? Well, he said, I'm a managing director of a shipping firm. And he said, I would have retired by next week. I couldn't have done it for you. And so it goes the whole way. Then I got to England, and I went over to see Henry Hamblin, who is a distant, well, by marriage he is related to us, and a very beautiful soul. He is the editor of the Science of Thought Review. and he's a very wonderful person. And I naturally went over to see him. Well, he said, Gertrude, there's a letter here from you from the United States. I said, oh, what about? Well, he said, they've written a letter from New Jersey, Hamburg, New Jersey, the Reverend Ross Flanagan. Oh, yes, I said, I was with them when I was over there before, held some meetings there. He had a boy who had sort of paralysis one side, and, well, that's another story. Anyway, this letter was from them, and this is what it said. We will be so delighted if you could find Gertrude Dekoch. She's in England, and knowing that you are in some way related to her, maybe you can find her whereabouts. Christopher, this is the son, Christopher wants to pay her one-way passage over to the States because we wanted to hold meetings in New Jersey. 5 years ago, through looking and hunting around for Walter Russell because I wanted to see if what Dr. Glenn Clark had written about him was true. It's time up. Well, it will be because of the children, but I won't take long. I met a Mrs. Swanson, who was then acting as his secretary. And it's through Mrs. Swanson that I met Mrs. Waldron. Through Mrs. Waldron, I met Dr. Glenn Clark. And through Dr. Glenn Clark that I'm here with you. It's rather a nice pattern, isn't it? Rather a nice pattern. Well, that is one of the many things. Some of the people asked me too this afternoon if I would explain how to train little children and how to treat them as they should be treated. But I must first ask if this is allowed, because the children's class is 4:45, isn't it? Yes, I believe so. But it's 4:30, isn't it? Pardon?
So you can take 10 minutes longer. I think that'll prepare us.
That'll just give us time to go over there.
10 minutes longer.
All right. This subject with little children is a very beautiful one, because you yourself must become as a little child if you would know how to treat your children. For instance, in the children's class I have, and this would apply to the way you would treat your own children, I would ask them how they could, for instance, understand these words, the pure in heart see God. You must test your children out with these things and see the beautiful answers they will give you. And I explained what it was to be pure in heart, and the following week a little Erica came. It was her turn to answer the question. Well, I said, Erica, it's your turn today. Have you found out how to be pure in heart? And have you been pure in heart? She was a little thing about this high. She said, oh, I haven't been pure in heart all the week, Gertie. They all call me by my Christian name. And I said, you haven't? She said, no. She said, you see, my daddy went off with another woman and left my mommy and made her cry. And I didn't like him, and I didn't like her. And I was angry, and I did not have a pure heart, did I? Well, I said, what did you do, dear? You have to get a pure heart again, so what did you do? Oh, she said, I just thought about it, and I asked God to show me, and this is what I think I did was right, she said. I think my daddy must have forgotten all about God, don't you? And then I think that woman he went with perhaps didn't know God at all. So I just thought they couldn't help it. So I just said, oh, God, will you make my daddy love you all over again? And will you show that woman that she must love God too? And then I was pure in heart, wasn't I, Gertie? What do you think of that? From a child. Her daddy came back. And so I feel if you will let children answer those hard questions themselves by experiences in their own lives. For instance, I taught them that within the seeds of every flower is the embryonic pattern of what that flower will be. And that right within each little child is a pattern of his heavenly Father, and they have to become true to that pattern. And I gave them many illustrations. And one day this little girl came and we were talking, and I said, who's been on the pattern all the week? Oh, she said, I was off my pattern for 2 days. I'd like to know how many adults could say they were off the pattern just 2 days out of a week. Well, I said, what did you do? Oh, she said, I was very angry with my sister. I hit her. And I didn't forgive her for 2 days. And I didn't speak to her for 2 days. Why? I said, that means you couldn't talk to God for 2 whole days. We can't talk to God when we've got anger in our hearts. No, she said, I know. I didn't talk to him for 2 days. We would, wouldn't we? We'd go on praying till the cows came home, whether we'd hit somebody or whatever we'd done. We would, but not a child, not when you teach them right. Well, I said, what happened after that? Oh, she said, I told God all about it then. And I did tell my sister I was sorry. I said, what did you tell God? She said, I just said, Heavenly Father, for goodness sake, keep me on my pattern. Isn't it perfect? I haven't written it quite like that in the book because you could hardly write it that way, but that is how it happened. And one more little story about a little boy who got healed. Crowds of children get healed of their sicknesses and disabilities because of their little faith. And that is why this little talk, miscellaneous as it is, must be based on, except you become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom. This little child had his fingers like this. They wouldn't come together. He couldn't move them because as a child he'd had an operation on his brain for epilepsy. And in the operation, successful as it was, they had severed a nerve which hindered the fingers from coming together. So the mother brought this little chap to me. He was 10 years old. He sat down and she said, now, Tony, listen to Mrs. Dekoch. He said, oh, in a minute, I want to look at all the pretty things in her room. Well, I said, let him. So he looked all round. And in that time, that short time, God gave me my message. He turned round at last and he said, I'm ready. I said, who told you that you were ready? Who told you to first look around at all these things in my room? Who is it, Tony? Who told Tony to turn round? Why, he said, that's my life. I said, and what is life? Why, that's God. Oh, he said, I know, we've got a sort of boss in us, haven't we? Don't you think that's rather sweet? We've got a sort of boss in us that tells us to do things. I said, yes, and it is the boss. It's a little son of God. This little house, your little body, is called Tony. This place you're sitting in my flat, that has a name, Constantia Court. This little place is Tony, but inside is God's little son. And that little son is perfect, only you haven't discovered him, have you? Now that's you've got to discover. And then when you discover it, you just let the little son of God take charge of all Tony's affairs. And then he tells Tony what to think, what to do, how to react. Oh, he said, I think that's wonderful. Well, I said, when you put Tony to bed tonight, you'll put him on the bed and he'll go to sleep. But you, the little son of God, won't go to sleep, because spirit does not slumber, nor does it sleep. So, Tony, when you put that body on the bed tonight, say, Tony, you're going to sleep now, you're going to rest. And I want the use of that hand tomorrow, Tony. I want my life to go into that hand so that I can use it, Tony. He said, and it could happen? Why, yes, I said, it moves this hand. And God made your body, why shouldn't he mend your hand? It's only a nerve. Oh, he says, I'm going to do it. Would we say, oh, I'm going to do it? Or would we say, wonder if it would work? I'll try, but I wonder if it'll work. But not Tony. I said, and when it happens, I didn't say if. And when it happens, what are you going to do? Oh, he said, I'll have to say thank you, God, won't I? Yes, you will, because you're part of that great, wonderful Father of yours. And that's the little Son of God, that is going to do this thing. Well, even I didn't expect it to happen as quickly as it did. He left. I said, shall I write it all down? No, thanks, he said. I can remember. The next day I was having my lunch in a store nearby, and somebody tapped me on my shoulder, and it was Tony with his mother. He said, look, look, look. This morning when I woke up, it was done. And his mother was weeping. And I said, what a wonderful thing. I said, what did you do, Tony? Oh, he said, I rushed in and told Mother, and I rushed and told all my friends. I said, you did? I thought we had another thing we had to do. Oh, Fred, I forgot. I must thank God. I said, yes. Oh, that's all right. He said, I can go back to my table and thank him there. And he went back to the table in the restaurant and bowed his little head and prayed. Tony can still use all his fingers. Friends, there is no time for any more. And I've touched on so many little things. But except you become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom.